Our tech, yes.
Thanks to the tech team.
You want to sit this out?
No. No, I'll just go back.
Okay.
You start getting pictures.
Nice. Just need to lean on something because I'm operating on 2 new knees now. So taking the pressure off helps. So, nice picture. That's what it looks like from the air. This is a pretty cool picture. One thing it shows you is how big an area they used at the bottom. Oh, thanks.
Where's your house?
Right up
That's
this way.
right, upper right-hand corner.
It's there, top right.
Brown roof?
No, across the street.
Across the street.
No, it's
Yeah.
not. It's
The upper right corner.
It's the corner of the farthest right.
Okay.
But you can see the size of the control structure compared to the size of the ponds. It's huge.
You want a
Oh,
pointer?
yeah, pointer, yes.
Talk about
So what's your house?
over-engineering. So this area here is about the size of this pond. This is the pond called Pickard Pond. The whole thing is one pond. And we call it Pickard Pond because that was the one that was developed by the Pickard quarrying activities. This is Mount Allison Pond, again, because Mount Allison dug it out there. And just because we're looking at this picture, look at this valley down here. There was a road that went up like this, and that was how stones were trucked out by Mount Allison, taken to Shediac for trimming into the right shape, and brought back here to build buildings on campus. Blaze lives there. So briefly, just a few highlights. This is a natural history, not a cultural history talk. Paul gave a really great one last year in February at the town hall. But high quality red sandstone, really a building quality. A lot of quarries around here have grindstone quality stone. This was building quality. And then it was a huge enterprise started by Charles Pickard in the late 1800s. About 1885, 86, I think, Paul could correct me. And it took a lot of stone out, up to 800 tons a day at the peak. The hole in the ground is huge. It's at least 200 by 60 feet, 200 feet square, 60 feet deep. That train, picture of the train in the middle is taken in Pickard Quarry. So there was a railway spur line coming off the Intercolonial Railway up around the back of the York Street Cemetery and out into a trestle in the middle of the quarry as it stands now. And so this is the size of the rocks that were taken out, the slabs of stone that were exported out of here. Phenomenal. These were all in the timing of about 1885 to about 1910, 1915. There were many large buildings, huge derricks, teams of horses, and it was used consistently throughout Mount Allison, but also across town. There are lists in a publication that Paul put together a couple of years ago of buildings across Eastern Canada. The extension to the provincial legislature in Ontario was done with this stone because they couldn't match it with Ontario stone. And this shift went from Pickard in the early part of the century to Mount Allison in the mid-century, mid-20th century, where they just focused on building stone for the campus. And then by 1971, 72, they were winding down and they were given a lot of flack for dynamiting in what was now becoming a residential area. And so that was the end. They stockpiled some stone and wrapped it up. And so that activity really set the stage for the park as it stands now. Before the quarrying, this was an area that was heavily agriculture. It was open farmland. You get a feel for it from that picture at the top, which is 1931, but you can still see the farm fields all around. And this small brook that bisected it. Quarrying took off a layer of glacial till and overburden first, then got down to the sandstone that was used to for building and was extracted. And they really dug a deep hole into the ground. So those ponds are completely a relic of the quarrying activity. And since then, though, that rock shape that was left has developed into a whole bunch of different kind of aquatic and terrestrial habitats that have then supported a variety of ecological communities. So it's now this naturalized wooded area. It's owned by Mount Allison for many years and fenced off, so people weren't supposed to go in there for liability reasons. But there were holes cut in the fence, and all the residents around there used the quarry. It was crisscrossed by a bunch of small pathways. And people went in there, we skated, all our kids and Peter's kids, everybody skated and swam. So we had a good time in there. It was also a traditional hangout for people from Mount Allison and the high school. Anyone who went to Mount A who was on the, either heard the sketchy stories or were part of them. So as I mentioned, in late 2022, this was transferred to Tenchbar. And these are some of the pictures of the excavation that took place there and the huge amount of disturbance that took place. It's designed that they can have a 10-foot rise in water level inside that dam before it drains out a pipe which is sort of 10 feet up. So it drains out a bottom one now, and then if there's a huge flood in an inundated area, water will back up. That's because the pipe there is too small to take all the water that would be coming. It rises until it gets to a higher pipe and goes out that one, and that keeps it at a certain level. It's hard for me to imagine that that would ever happen, but they did design it for was potentially a 200-year storm. In the past few years, Doug and I and others have gone out and checked after a big rainfall, and the most we can get is going up about 6 inches. So it's not in the realm of what's happening now. But the result was that there was a huge area of beautiful mixed woodland that was lost. So we approached the town and said, look guys, let's make this into a park. Let's maintain small, wiggly, rough pathways and low impact trails. Let's put some signage in there to encourage people to walk and use it for recreation, for natural history and cultural history appreciation. And the town agreed. In the past, they've talked about having parking lots and jungle gyms and things like that. We said, no, we just want it to, basically the way it is, but easily accessed by people, safely accessed, and with some information that will make people understand and appreciate what went on in the past. So it's linked in with our trails in the town and Tenchbar's status as a wetland city. And as I said, the town said it was a good idea. So these are the partners. Town Tenchbar is the co-lead with the Outdoor Club. They do a lot of the planning. They assume the responsibility. They put up the money for it, or track down some money for it, and work very closely with us, the Outdoor Club, the Naturalist Club, and the Heritage Trust. The Regional Commission has also helped out in terms of their expertise in designing trails and planning and looking for permits and that sort of thing. This is one of those success stories. You keep looking for the downside, and we really haven't hit that yet. The worst is that people still leave their doggy do bags in the park there, even though we have garbage cans for them. But that's the main problem. So I'm just going to talk about what we did to make it into what it is today very quickly, and then I'll go on to the natural history. And I've been reminded that I'm supposed to try to keep this as short and quick as possible. So we developed a whole bunch of trails based largely on the pre-existing pathways. We built some new ones. This is Doug and Gary Donaldson who helped. This is right underneath Peter Manchester's old house on the slope there. It was very slippery, so we made a nice sheltered little in-cut trail there. We made stone steps, we added logs, we chopped out old logs. We spread a lot of gravel. First we were down on the gravel idea, but it really makes the trails last longer, and they're safer. They get good grip, they're much better when it's wet, and the well-used sections don't erode the same way. All this work was done by volunteers. So the town put a couple of piles of gravel and bought us a wheelbarrow and some shovels, and then we took over there, and a bunch of us have lugged that gravel in there, dug out the trails, and if I look around here, I see at least a dozen people who've been involved in that kind of work. So now we've got over 1,100 meters of trails and pathways. We went through a coding system. This map on the side is my initial sketch map that I did, not on the back of an envelope, it was more complicated than that, but initially I was planning to have 3 kinds of trails, 3 levels of difficulty. So the green trail, which comes up from the bottom, is flat, graveled, and quite wide, and can be used by wheelchairs. So actually that helped because we were able to get some special funding to put that trail in. And it goes to that little box there, which is the viewing deck. The blue square, just mention these are circle, squares, and triangles. So if you're colorblind, you can navigate by the shape of the marker rather than the color. The blue squares mark the main loop trail, which is easily accessible by anybody with kids or older folks as well, who've got pretty good or in pretty good shape. And then the red trails in the back are steeper, more rugged, and they don't have all the gravel on them and the grading that we did on the other trails, so they're more work. We also have some trails, I'll show you in the next slide, that link up to residential areas in the surrounding area. One thing that didn't happen was we weren't able to, Andrew?
No black diamond trails?
No, well, they're not mine.
They're coming. Not yet.
The university decided not to be a formal partner. They were concerned about liability and potentially using their adjacent lands for future development. And as Paul can point out, they're a very conservative bunch, and they just didn't want to formally play ball. But informally, they said, do what you want, just don't tell us about it. So that's what we've done. So you'll see on this map, which Peter did based on my initial sketch that looked much better, you'll see there are small little gray trails going off to the side. And those lead to entry points from the surrounding residential areas. So the one at the top goes to my house, the one at the bottom goes to, I don't know, Graham Sorensen's house, the one that, there goes to York Street. So people can walk in from the surrounding area as well as having to go in on those two main entry points where the parking lots are on Quarry Lane and Charlotte Street. So these have got markers on the same kind of thing we use on the ski trails. And this map here is found at various points around the trail network so people don't get lost. And it shows where the trails are, it shows how long they are, the difficulty, and points out some of the landmarks like parking lots, scenic views, brooks, etc.
Where's the outlet structure there?
It's on the right here. So Bowser Brook is this blue strip that comes in from the top, comes past Peter Manchester's and Lucy's house over here, goes down in across the waterfall into Pickard Pond, loops around like this, and then goes under the pipes and out here, still called Bowser Brook. This is the end of Quarry Lane, so right beside the end of Quarry Lane where you park is Bowser Brook, the exit. Just point out that you don't see any streams going between those two ponds. And that's really cool, because we'll get to that later, if I haven't run out of time. So the town put up some bucks. They, the Blue Trail now crosses over the brook just above the waterfall. If you stand there and look down, you're right above the waterfall. So it's this beautiful 30-foot wooden bridge. This is the viewing deck that was funded by Medivie. And we've now got these sort of as destinations in the quarry for people to go to. And just a reminder, this is at the end of the accessible trail, so people can actually get to that on by wheelchair. They were built by local contractors, and they have destinations that overlook Pickard Pond. The other facilities that we've managed to put up, the Sackville Rod and Gun Club approached the local scout troop and said, let's make some picnic tables. So the scouts did the work, the Sackville Rod and Gun Club put up the money for the materials, and we've now got 4 of these beautiful picnic tables in various places, 2 at the Quarry Lane entrance and 2 beside the ponds. Again, destinations for people to get to. We had Ross Thomas cut up an old birch tree into logs about 18 inches long, and we lugged them around in the wheelbarrow there, and you can see Gary and Mount A student there put them up to serve as stools or benches. We've got them in 7 or 8 different spots around the park. The town's gated off the entranceway so that people can't drive in their ATVs. And as you can see, put up some signs, we'll get to those. We've also got a couple of garbage cans, but I think we need more. So these are the kind of entry signs that people see when they come. They're big enough to be seen from the roads. They introduce the visitors to the past as a quarrying enterprise, talk about what's happened here, and link to the university. They also provide regulations like no fires, no smoking, those kinds of things. That's an example of that sign there. Yeah, I notice it doesn't say no bicycles, which is good, because a lot of kids in there on bikes right now, but why not? Our kids did that too. And you can walk your dogs, but you need to poop and scoop. So it provides a summary of the regulations. We also have signs like this, talking about the transition from an industrial quarry to a naturalized wetland and an upland. And then more specific signs talking about specific kinds of things you might see in there. We have interpretive panels now that are spread around the trail network. These three here talk about the birds. I'll just take a minute to point out that almost all the bird pictures were taken by two of our local naturalists. I think it was 2 years ago that Gavin and what's his name? Jaden gave a talk here showing their birds, bird photos that they'd taken around the area. So I already talked to Gavin and Jaden and said, can you provide those pictures, some of those pictures to us? So they said, yeah, give us a list of species. They did so, and free gratis, they provided these pictures. So they're all acknowledged, but the result is that we've got pictures taken with local examples of the birds. And some really startling. I mean, the picture of the mallards in the bottom was fantastic, as well as the one of the vultures. We've also talked about plants and mammals. Sean helped with the plant information. Sean did a part of the environmental assessment, I think 2019, did a plant survey there, went in several days through the summer and recorded all the plants he saw, collected information on what was there, documented it, and prepared an annotated checklist. And so we've used that to as the basis for this, and Sean provided most of the pictures for the plant panel. Some of those other ones, the pictures on the mammals, actually came from iNaturalist, where if I didn't have good pictures of otters, I just got in touch with guys who had good pictures on iNat, and they said, oh yeah, sure. So they're all from Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. They're semi-local anyway. And then we want to interpret the cultural history too, or the industrial history. So this is the kind of thing you can still see in the park. Rocks that were left over from over 100 years ago now, with holes drilled in it for putting dynamite in to explode all simultaneously and chunk that rock out and then have it exploded. We found this interesting tool when we were cleaning up a couple of years ago. One of the cleanup groups did it, found it. We're not sure what it is. It's about this long. It's a hook of some kind. We've got various series. And we've also had access. Paul's spent a lot of time with this. He's gone through the archives at the university, talked to a lot of people from who knew the park in earlier days, and got a lot of information. And we've summarized that information on panels like this as well, with a shift from the Pickard years to the university years, the techniques that were used, and some of these amazing photographs that Paul found in the archive showing how it was done. I mean, to think that this was once in the middle of what is now a quiet little skating pond, it just blows me away. And you can see that people use it for skating in the past. It was used for artwork. There's some great photographs. So the text was done by Paul with help from others in the Heritage Trust and the archives. And he wrote this up as a paper in White Fence, which you can get online, or we can send you electronic copies. There are some paper copies kicking around, but a much more detailed summary of the information that he was able to dig up. We're still working out there. We're still cleaning up. As I mentioned, Mount A had put fencing all around it. We've been doing a lot of work, led by Doug, to get the old fencing out. And this is a pile of it that's ready for removal. We're going to leave it at the top of West Avenue because there's a steep escarpment there, which is probably a good idea to have a barbed wire fence. Bruce has helped out with some information, some tools for pulling these stakes out of the ground. And then there's a lot of other stuff in there, furniture, a bunch of garbage, glass, debris. And so that's been collected by volunteers either as they go through there or on some spring cleanups. Ross Thomas came in and sawed down the old trees. And we think that vandalism has really gone down a lot. There's hardly anything going on there. It's almost as if it's a self-policing situation. We're revegetating that moonscape at the front. This is what it looked like when it was recently developed. Now they've just sort of hydroseeded it with grass, maybe a few lupins. At the opening, we planted some marsh milkweed. We're going to get red oaks and red maple and a few other species the town is going to buy. They buy them when they're already about the height of this ceiling, so you're not messing around with little things. So we'll have about 6 or 8 of these trees to start us, and then we'll plant other things around. We have a small team of volunteers on our revegetating committee. And then there's multiflora rose. If you haven't met this beast, you don't want to, because you don't find it, it finds you. It's an introduced and very aggressive species of bushy rose. It's got very stout branches that curve around, and the thorns on it are monstrous. And it grows very, very quickly. And so we've decided that we're going to actually try to get rid of some of this, because other places in the Maritimes have had this happen to them, and it just takes over, it clogs things out. Right now it makes our trails hard to walk. If I wasn't in there clearing the trails every few weeks, it would stop them from being usable. So we've come up with this plan with the town. We're going to cut the bushes down, pile up the remains at a big central site. Then we're going to pull out the roots, so cut them off. We can't use ploid in a wetland. So we'll use a tool called the extracticator. The town bought 2 of these orange things for us, and they grab onto that stalk and pull it out by the roots. And then the town also bought us a chipper shredder like that. We'll bring that into the site, and we'll chip all the branches and all the roots, because a plant like that can usually regenerate from pieces of the vegetation itself. So we're going to bag them, take them off site, and hopefully, we're not going to eradicate the species, but we'll hopefully reduce its numbers, at least in areas where we want there to be a chance for other species to grow. So anybody who wants to help with that in the next few weeks, we're going to get started, so let me know. And so now we have reached the point where it's a park. It opened up last fall. It's been steadily used through the fall and all through the winter as well. I often stop and ask people where they come from, how they heard about it, and the stories are amazing. People from PEI said, yeah, we saw it on the CBC news feed, so we check it out next time we're here. Others were moving through the Maritime, and someone told about it, so they stopped on their way to Halifax. So a lot of people are in there now. This exaggerates the number of people who might be using the park, because that was taken on the opening day. But I estimate that in peak days we're getting at least 150 people a day. On average, we're probably getting 30 to 50. You see someone every time you go in there. Today, the only person I saw was Kate, because it was pouring rain. But we were only there for a short time, too. But it's amazing who you see, and university kids, local residents. One of my checks was, how do the local residents feel about it? There was a lot of trepidation when I talked to people before we got started, saying, I don't know if I like that idea. I'm so glad Mount Ida didn't come in, because and now saying, whoa, this is great, I got my grandkids in there. And so some people here live nearby, and you can go through there. That's how you walk to work now. That's how the kids go for a walk, take your dog for a walk. So it's really expanded well. So now I'm going to switch to the naturalization and the natural history. So now what we've got for terrestrial habitats are some regenerating old fields, and they're actually getting fewer because regeneration is taking place pretty quickly. Low cliffs and outcrops, shrub-lined banks, and this bottom picture sort of shows a little bit of everything. Coniferous mixed and hardwood stands, and then the wetland habitat has 2 ponds and Bowser Brook that flows in and out of Pickard Pond. So where do those things come from? Some of those species come from either managed to hang on all the way from the agricultural period or even pre-agriculture, or survived the quarrying, or came in after the quarrying or during quarrying from surrounding areas. And then as more habitats developed and got more complex, there were spots created for more species to arrive. Some of them were assisted by human activities. Quite a few apple trees in there. And Paul's theory is that this was just guys at the end of their lunch chucking their apple into the bush. We don't think they were planted. It's not a residential area. So we think that was more a result of just human activity. These lupins probably came from nearby gardens or farmlands. And the kind of animals you get in there, or animals and plants, are often of two types. There are generalists like the crows, which you expect they're going to be there, they're everywhere. They figured out how to make use of the pond. But there are others like specialists like this turkey vulture. I'll come back to them later, but you hardly ever see turkey vultures on the ground or in a tree, but you get them in the quarry because the quarry provides a certain kind of habitat, habitat structure with this vertical component to it that you don't often get in this area that really attracts the vultures. So as I mentioned, Sean did this study, 282 vascular plants that he found at the time. Look at that, 44% of those are non-native. Everywhere you go, you find non-native species. It might be more like 20 or 15 or 25%, but 44 is really, really high. And it just reflects the kind of experience that this area has gone through. These letters reflect how common or uncommon, I think I've got the next slide showing you, yeah, translating those numbers, those letters. So, mentioned the apple trees. Metzer's Daphne and lupins probably came from nearby properties. A lot of species that are in there aren't native tree species. The most common tree in there, I think, is Norway maple, which is not a native to here. English oak is found there along with red oak. And Scotch and Austrian pine. Again, you can see them planted around the outside. There are a bunch of them along West Avenue, but they've also seeded into the quarry itself. So these, if you see the letters, rare, uncommon, fairly common, and common. And one thing that Sean pointed out too is that we're not done yet. Things continue to change. And so we built a flood control structure, bridges. We've attracted a lot of people going in there. We've dug up the trails. And so some species will be potentially lost, and others may be coming in as a result of these continuing human activities. These are some of the things that Sean found out. Dwarf clearweed and Pennsylvania blackberry are provincially significant, very scarce in New Brunswick, but they were both found here. His record of non-native small flower willow herb is only the second one for the province. You see quite a few mountain ash in there, and the birds really love those because they've got berries that last well into the winter. But most of those are actually the European species rather than the local one, than the native one. And as succession goes on, you can already see things changing. There are probably fewer grass species. There's certainly much fewer areas, much smaller areas covered in grass as the trees expand and the woods move into what was previously grasslands. And things like paper and gray birch are successional species, and they're already falling out. They make great roosts for vultures, but only for a while. So that tree on the left, which is now a stump, when we started putting that trail through 2 years ago, that was a full birch tree. Now it's a stub, and I think that's actually half the height of when I took that picture a little while ago. So it's a reminder that things continue to change. I mentioned some plant pests. Of those non-native species, 20 of them are considered invasive, meaning that they aren't just there, they're actually continuing to come in and affect other species and take over. Purple loosestrife and glossy buckthorn are among the 10 least wanted invasives in New Brunswick. They're both there, but so far they haven't really expanded very much and aren't problem species. But this guy at the bottom, the multiflora rose, is the one that really increases rapidly. A couple of years ago, I left the park for a month and a half in July and August, and the main area across the causeway, the amount of growth that took place in there took me 4 hours to clear the roses out so you could walk through it again. So that's the kind of thing that goes on all the time. And that's what they do with you. That's my leg. After a simple encounter, I was actually doing a fishing study, but that friggin' rose got me. So I had a personal vendetta, I admit it. So the birds in the park. That picture in the upper right is actually taken in the park. Barred owl, yeah. And we think that at least 50 bird species likely breed there. We've only found nests of maybe half a dozen or 10. But there are others that we know are there. They sing throughout the breeding season. Some of them are resident year-round, others come in later on. And some of them are native species, like the downy woodpecker on the right. Others are introduced by humans, like the pheasant, which is a native of southern Asia. And some have only colonized the area in the past 2 or 3 decades. So you probably all know about how cardinals have only moved into New Brunswick in the past 30 or 40 years. And apart from Grand Manan, most of the province only had them for maybe 15 years. And now they're very, very common, and they're obviously easy to see and easy to hear too. So we've got a bunch of sources of birds breeding in the park. The migratory breeding birds are the ones that aren't resident year round. All the ones in the previous slide were, these guys come in the spring, and they overwinter further south, they nest here, and then they move off again in the fall. Most of them are songbirds. These pictures are all taken by our local photographers. And they find their nest sites in a variety of different areas. So we think well over 100 birds are there. There's actually, for you, those of you who are birders, there's an eBird hotspot flagged for this area. And so you can very quickly go in and look at this bird species. I haven't looked at it for a while, but it's very big. We've also got an iNaturalist project going there. So all records that you put into iNaturalist in an area with, I guess, a 100-meter buffer around the actual park itself are recorded and collected, and so we can keep track of a whole bunch of species that are recorded in those 2 apps. I mentioned the fact that this is sunken into the ground and there aren't very many areas around here, apart from the other quarries, that are like that. And it creates what we call a sunbowl effect. You can have a windy day, you don't want to go skating on the waterfowl park, but it's great skating on the quarry because it's sunny and warm. And this effect provides protection and shelter for a lot of birds in the winter. Many of these are the same birds that you might see around Sackville, but they roost in the park and the quarry, and a lot of them feed there because there are many of these species of trees and bushes that provide sources of food. Again, those are all, and these ones too, taken by our local birders and photographers. So we have some species that you think might hang around and nest, but so far we don't think they have. So even the spotted sandpiper see them in the spring and fall, but they don't seem to stay through the summer, I mean. Ringneck ducks and myrtle warblers will come through as well. And part of this seems to be the fact that even though we've got a lot of diversity structurally and from a plant perspective, it's still a very small area. And so there just aren't enough diverse habitats to support many of these species. So for example, no, we'll get to it in a minute. Save the example. I mentioned turkey vultures. This is I've got 3 cool animal things. Turkey vultures is one of them. Only breeding in this province since 1998, confirmed. With warming climates, they've expanded into southern parts of Canada. They're important scavengers, and at night they roost in tall trees or on cliff faces. And here they do so in the park on spring and fall migration. We've seen over 100 of them circling the park at once. And that's in the fall. I think my peak this year in the spring was 25. But they're still around. And so they want to be able to fly in sideways to a roost, stop, and then launch off again, and even dip down as they leave. And so the structure of the quarry gives them that opportunity. And so it's reasonably sheltered, it's reasonably quiet, it's got tall trees, so they're not feeding in there, they're roosting. And it's amazing to think that these vultures come from a large area over southern New Brunswick and adjacent Nova Scotia in spring and fall, collect here, spend maybe 3-4 weeks, we think, individually. The turnover is probably significant, but in the fall they're here from early September through till early December. And then they fan out in the day, feed who knows how big an area, and then come back at night to roost. It's an incredible thing to see. And this is a picture that I think Gavin took of a turkey vulture very close to here. Mammals are different. You don't see the darn things. You know they're there. So we conclude that at least 24 species of mammals are likely occurring there. We've confirmed 18 species, either seeing them or seeing their tracks. And the tracks are really the best way to confirm them. Rob Lyon did these track drawings for us, and they're on the posters that we have in the park. Some of them are here year-round, like I'm sure raccoons are there all the time. Others, like otters, probably come and visit and move on again. But we do have an amazing mammal diversity, from small mammals like Sorex shrews and Paramiscus mice, up to Peter's record of a moose coming out of the quarry going past his house and across York Street many years ago. And he was definitely a traveling through kind of animal. So in that park, we've got red squirrels, snowshoe hares, raccoons, striped chipmunks, a bunch of things you would expect to be there. Deer is another species that has expanded recently in the last 10 years or so. I think we only spawned in the park about 6 or 7 years ago. And now they're in there a lot. They overwinter there. They herd up in the winter on some of the slopes in the park. And then they fan out to the bird feeders and everything else in our town and drive our birds and our bird feeding people crazy. But there are trees in there that, you know, they've got lots of apples, they've got shelter, they've got everything they need. And then they've got access to places to go in the nighttime. So I'm not sure how many there are, probably a half a dozen or so. I want to just pause for a minute, not before we talk about wetland species, to talk about the kind of wetlands that we have here. These two ponds are of different age. So the southern one, Pickard Pond, really hasn't been quarried since the 1930s. We know that the upper margin, where that trail goes through the middle, changed significantly. But Mount Allison only extracted rock from the new pond, which was created in maybe the 30s or 40s on the north side. And so the bottom pond is largely unchanged for 90 years, whereas the other one's maybe 50 years. The other point is that only Pickard is directly connected to Bowser Brook, part of the flowage. So the water in that pond is gradually replaced as the water flows in and out. Whereas in the Mount Allison pond, the only way it gets in is by coming down a really small catchment area through little rivulets and springs and overground runoff in storms. And then to get out of there, it probably just seeps through the causeway from the northern pond, Mount Allison, into Pickard Pond, and then out through Bowser Brook. And so it's got significant implications for the kind of animals that you might expect to find there. Pickard Pond has twice the area of Mount Allison. It's much more diverse in terms of the shoreline, with cliffs and beaches and wet areas and low areas. Mount Allison has a bunch of boulders in it that you can see in that first photograph. And as I mentioned, the water levels don't vary very much. It's really controlled by the height of the outflow pipe at the end of Quarry Lane. And so the most we've seen it vary is about 15 centimeters. Even after a big storm, it's usually only about 4. To the point where Mount Allison will rise a little bit, but I haven't yet seen it to a point where it will literally flood over and go into Pickard Pond. So what does that mean for the animals? Oh yeah, we didn't even know how deep these places were.
Yeah.
You hear all these stories about there's no bottom. You've got railway cars in there. So I wanted to figure that out. As a scientist, I thought, well, let's find out. So Kate and I took our canoe, we brought it in, and in May 2021, we took a sounding rope with feet, marked off in feet, and then went all around each of the ponds with a copy of my old map and recorded how deep it was in all these places. And then we drew these contours, or there's a bathy something or other word for these underwater contours, showing you where it's deep and where it's shallow. So most of the depths are in the range of, I'm going to use feet, 3 to 8 feet, and the maximum was 13 feet, which you think about it, that's more than twice my height. It's really quite deep. Pickard was the most diverse. These areas are quite deep, 12 feet deep here, 6 feet deep, 13, 10 feet. Here we got 9.5 in the middle as the deepest. And it's quite illuminating to see it. Some of them are only a foot deep or a meter deep there on the shallow area between those two sides of Pickard Pond. So you can think about that in terms of what's likely to be there in terms of other species. Aquatic mammals we know occur there. Most of them are likely traveling up and down the brook system or overland. We've seen muskrats moving through, that's the guy on the top. But there are no cattails in this pond. It's got quite steep sides. Remember, all the topography is a result of what the quarrymen did. It's nothing to do with how things eroded or built up naturally. And so there are very few areas where cattails would grow in shallow, silty areas. So no muskrats. I've seen a beaver twice moving through. And when I first went in there, even 5 years ago, you could find old beaver cut trees, poplar trees, and stumps. And there are two carnivorous members of the weasel family that occur here. There was a mink bumping around there in October last year, and they're rarely seen. But river otters, which is another one of my key fun species, are really quite common here. So again, think about that. This is a man-made quarry in the middle of a residential area that's got otters in it. Otters, I found out, are surprisingly mobile. They'll move around a lot. They spend a lot of time on land. I've seen them fishing in the Sackville Waterfall Park. Again, they're rarely seen, but their tracks in the mud and on the ice, snow and ice confirm that. So these are my skates, and you can see the otter tracks running across below me. They feed under the ice. They keep holes open when they're moving through. And I think there was one denning for a while in the rocks on that small peninsula that goes out and separates the two halves of Pickard Pond. And they cross that narrow causeway between the two ponds. And we've got an interpretive sign up there talking about the movement along these two little trails. This was the next question. Are there any fish in the ponds? Well, the clue was otters, mink, kingfishers, and herons. Of those, kingfishers stay through the summer and probably nest. Otters, mink, and herons move through and spend some time there. So that suggests that fish are there. So last fall, I decided to check it out, and I alternately sampled different sites on each of the ponds for 6 days. So 12 trapping days. I used what I've ostentatiously referred to as a Promar TR 601 minnow trap, but actually I went to Canadian Tire in Amherst and I bought a minnow trap off the shelf. But they're great. They're 18 inches long. They've got funnels on each end, sort of like lobster trap style. You bait them with a bit of cheese, meat, breadcrumbs, or bread chunks, and it works. I caught an average of 16 fish a day, 192 in total, and 67 in one catch. So you can see them here. Now remember I talked about how diverse the structure of the southern pond was. That's Pickard Pond. 5% of my fish were caught in Pickard Pond. 95 were in the other pond, which looks like it shouldn't really have that much. And Mount Allison had 4 species, Pickard had 3. And I'll just quickly show you what the species were. So golden shimer was the most common species. These things are an orangey looking minnow. They look like a goldfish, but they're not. They're a native species. They spend their time in a bunch of different waterways. I caught them up to 7 inches long, which is quite big for that species. And we think that's because there aren't many predators and things to limit their growth here. So if they do okay, they just keep getting bigger. But they're gorgeous little fish and very easy to catch, at least by me. I then got what I thought were all banded killifish, which are the ones at the top. Little minnows with, see the bands on the side, long and narrow. And it occurred in both of them. These again are a schooling fish that spends time on the bottom of the ponds, whether they're clear or muddy. And that amount of banding on the side, the top 2 pictures, varies, as you can see, from fish to fish. These guys are just like that long. But what I found was that some of them were chunky, and they didn't have the obvious banding. And so there's a closely related species called the mummy chalk, which is normally only found in salt water and estuarine water, but can be found in fresh. Places like Newfoundland have it. So there's a guy, Elliot, who is a retired biology prof in Moncton, who happens to know a lot about mummy chalks and things. So I checked with Elliot, and he said, "You got mummy chalks." So for some reason, they got there. And you should be going through in your mind when I talk about fish, and the fact that these ponds are anywhere from 50 to 100 years old. How did the fish get there? And you say, well, it came up the river. Well, just think of where that stream or river is. It comes in through Abydos, that's a challenge. It then comes up through the wetlands, which are now channelized by all the work that's been going on the other side of town. They then have to go under Sackville. A minimum of 750 meters, 3/4 of a kilometer, is piped underneath Save Easy, and I guess that's not Save Easy anymore. And the soccer fields and those new buildings that are being built now, they're building them on top of a pipe that goes up to where the brook comes out and stops at Salem. Yeah, I was gonna call it University, but that's old. At Salem, so it's fun, it's amazing to think that somehow these got there. They could have been transported by gulls with eggs on their feet, those kinds of things are always hypothesized. But from our point of view, is that it's not something that could have happened over hundreds of years. It happened in 50 to 75 years. And presumably before a lot of these flood control structures were limiting their movement, it would have been a more natural system. But the pipes under the town have been there for a long time. And then we've got the really weird one, with my third really cool species is the American eel. I found two full-grown American eels in the North Pond, which is Mount A Pond. They were 18 inches and 24 inches long. And if you think about a 24-inch long eel, that's a good sized eel. And this is just a reminder about eel life history. All eels in North America and Europe spawn down here in the Sargasso Sea south of Bermuda. The exact locations aren't known, it's not known how they do it. And think about it, you grow up in Sackville and you migrate out through all that complicated system down to the Sargasso Sea. You spawn with a male or a female, you have no idea where that individual fish came from. It could have been from the States, it could have been from Europe. And so you get this mixing. But what happens is a lot of eels are produced there. They come as glass eels and drift up through the Gulf Stream. They then swim up rivers as elvers. And you hear a lot about the elver fishery here in New Brunswick. It's a traditional Mi'kmaq fishery and quite productive and, what's the word, not lucrative, makes a lot of money. People in Europe and Japan really like these elvers. So they swim up to these freshwater habitats and grow there for 20 years or so till they're big enough to go back down and spawn. So those two that I caught at some point in the next 10 years or so will likely swim out to the Sargasso Sea and start all over again. So the challenge is, how'd they get there? They must have swum up through the Abigail Gates, underneath the town, those underground tunnels. Then they came up the brook into Pickard Pond, but both of them that I caught were in Ellison Pond, and there's no water connection between the two. But eels have a reputation for being able to get almost anywhere they want to go. They slither through damp ground. They're sticky and they can just sort of wiggle their way through like a worm or a small snake. A friend of mine, David Cairns, is an eel specialist. He worked for DFO for many years with Doug. He lives on the island, and I got in touch with Dave, and he said, no problem, they can get there. So eels are amazing. They can work. He said they can climb up the side of concrete structures if it's wet and rough. So even if there was a little bit of a step to get up, they'll follow the rushing water and work their way up. Sort of the same idea as salmon do it, but more by just getting their non-existent elbows in there and working their way up. So I estimated these between 5 and 12 and 13 to 18 years old. And so obviously they came before that huge structure was built there. We don't know what the next ones are going to find when they try to come back up. But it shows that this naturalized ecosystem has got some pretty complex and intricate components to it. So otters, eels, and vultures are my fun species out there. So one thing we still don't know much about is the herps, the amphibians and reptiles that occur in the park. If you go listen to spring peepers in the next few weeks, they're not there yet because the water's been too cold and the weather's been really crappy. We've been going out every evening. But in past years when we've gone to listen for peepers, we don't hear them in the park. We hear them out behind where Peter lives and further up towards, away from town, but not in the park itself. And so we're not sure if that's just we missed them and they're there, or there's some reason that they haven't colonized the park. They're pretty good at getting anywhere. I mean, if you drive from here to Abbotsford, you can almost hear them in every single wet bit of ditch all the way along. So they're pretty good at getting around. There's not much emergent vegetation, which they tend to like. And so there's hardly any spring chorus. We know that green plugs have been seen. I flushed them as I worked my way along the edges when I was doing that fish study. And toads and garter snakes have been seen as well. But we're going to find out. We think that up to 10 species of herps might be here. And I've spoken with Julia Riley, who many of you know. She's a prof at Mount A. And she's had students who've been studying garter snakes and redbacks in the park, not just in the park, but they have records of them in the park area. And so we've agreed to find out. Julia put a recording device in the park this year. Oh, that's on the next slide. We're going to go out a couple of times this year to find out, and we're going to bring people from this group who want to join us to look for frogs and toads calling in the evening, and if we time it right, for salamanders moving from the upland down to the water to spawn along the edges if they can find the right kind of conditions. We'll also do daytime surveys of woodland habitats, because if you flip over stones or logs, you often find redback salamanders or snakes or other things up there. And so here it says stay tuned for details. We're still working, and a lot of it's time dependent. This hasn't been a really early spring because it's been kind of wet and protracted, cold and protracted, but we'll see. But one thing that we have started is Jody has set up this recording device in the park. It's on that causeway between the north and south, or Mount A and Pickett Ponds. It's on a birch tree, a couple of feet off the ground. If you see it, please don't go close to it because you don't want it to look as if people are walking on. You can, if you work really hard and look every couple of feet along the way, you can find it's roughly halfway across the isthmus or the causeway. And it's set to record everything it can hear between 1 hour before sunset and 1 hour after. And it will record it in there, it's electronic. This device down below it here records temperature by time. So you're going to have a temperature profile going along with who's calling when. And the thing that she's got that I don't have is a bunch of students. Mm-hmm. And they're going to go through these, I'm going to call them tapes, but these files later on and listen for and record how many of each species that they're hearing each night. So we should know a lot more about what herps are in there by the end of, well, next fall term when the students have done their work. So this is a story about ongoing human changes that have driven or controlled the ecological changes. So in the past 150 years, a lot of things have happened. Some are really sudden, like quarrying starts, quarrying stops. You build a dam and cut off the flow of natural water. Other things are more gradual, more or less human activity on the trails, that kind of thing. But these things then drive what's going on in terms of ecological change. We're getting a lot of succession happening. I mentioned the birches at the top, where trees are coming in, some species are going out, the grasses are changing. Some species are moving in very quickly, like the multiflora rose. Others are very gradual. Some of those rare or uncommon species that Sean found only had a couple or maybe 2 or 3 plants that he could see. So they have never got to big numbers at all. Some things are gradual, others are episodic. So obviously eels arrived one day, and then there were eels in there, or fish arrived one day. But it's really interesting to see how this has happened up to now and how it's likely to change in the future. 20 years ago, you might not have predicted that there would be 100 turkey vultures there flapping like a big flock of grackles through the fall evening hours. And so we're observing and documenting. We're using eBird and iNaturalist to record it, and word of mouth to talk about it. And it's become sort of an ongoing laboratory and learning place. We can also share the information that we've got. So there's a QR code on all the signs up there, and if you use your phone and go onto it, it's the same one here. If you want it, before we leave, you can just take a look at this one and record it. You get these references. So there's the trail map is out there, a 4-page summary that I wrote about the background to the park. Paul's article on the industrial history of the park is there. Sean's, well, it's not Sean's actual inventory, but a paper that I drafted with Sean's help based on all his information is there. Birds and mammal list that Kate and I put together, and more to come when we learn about fish and amphibians and things. You can also just go to the municipal website and look for Quarry Park, and you'll find the same information. So these are all the people who helped out. I mentioned the town, Plan 360. We got funding from the 3 levels of government. I think there's well over $100,000 went into this. Virtually none of it translated into paying anybody, except some of the contractors who built the bridges, brought the gravel in, that sort of thing. Most of it was done by the 3 NGOs, including many volunteers who, from this group, a lot of them in this room right now. And so they've done things like the trail work, the mapping, designing and creating the signs and panels, collecting, producing, taking in the pictures and collecting the photographs, and then providing their expertise to provide the text on those panels. So far, I've been keeping track of people I know of who've helped out, and I've got over 55 names so far. So that's going to wrap it up for me. I just mentioned there are other people in this room, Sean and Doug and Peter, and I mean, goes on, Paul, who can answer various things too. So if you've got questions, I know we're short of time, we can ask them now. One thing I wanted to mention was that there are going to be some field trips there. I want to do a CNC field trip, probably on the Saturday, first or second Saturday in May. It's good to go before all the leaves are out because it may make it much harder to see things, but I've got to talk with Andrew and others here about what timing might work. But there will be other ones through the year you can hang on to if you want. So questions, thoughts? Peter?
I just want to mention that Paul Bogart probably dug deeper than Mr. Pickard did trying to uncover facts on
Yeah.
on the information he came with. It was very, very reclusive. They did a great job, you know, uncovering the stuff that he did.
Well, that's true. Much of that stuff we didn't know. The bird stuff's pretty, it's pretty easy. But yeah, he dug a lot, and I'm really pleased that he put it together in a publication. It's available on that website, and it's readily available. If you ask any of us, we can get it to you. But it really gives you way, way, way more information about who these guys were, what they did, how much they took out, what made them stop, made them start, where the stone's gone, and how they did it. That's really great, Paul. Any other comments? Andrew?
Any other salamanders expected besides
Yes.
redback?
The spotted,
spotted, yellow spotted?
the 2 spotteds might show up, yeah. Yes?
What is the source of the water? Is it spring fed or stream
Ah.
fed?
I could ask people who live there, I
Right.
don't know.
Most of the reason they stopped quarrying there because the hydraulic pumps were going all the time, and it became a residential site, and people would not put up with that sound 24/7. That's one of the main reasons they stopped digging there, aside from the, but I'm pretty sure it springs on the Mount Allison one. The other one is fed through the stream coming through.
So that goes behind where Peter lives now. It's a pretty shallow landscape, but it's a bit of a ditch too. So I think it's a reasonably big catchment area, and it comes across Charlotte Street, well, you see it at the bottom of those maps.
My second part of that question was about last year's drought. Did you notice a fluctuation in water levels?
Yeah,
Or
basically it
stable
stopped
as
going
it's-
out,
Okay.
and it almost stopped. It pretty well stopped coming in. Things just stopped, and so the water levels went down about 2 inches. That's about all.
That's it?
Yeah. So there's presumably quite a water table that is probably at the same level as the ponds are themselves, feeding into that. Yeah, it's surprisingly static, but it was really dry, and it just was well below where the pipe goes out, and the incoming, except when it rained, was dry. Yeah,
They're fed
okay.
by ephemeral streams.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's gonna stop it.
okay.
I was curious about, cover boards, like having set cover boards for reptiles and if.
Yeah, I talked to
was
Jody
covered,
about that.
Somebody was gonna go annually, that would give an opportunity to sort of survey moving forward.
Julie is not crazy about it. She says that in a place like this, people tend to disrupt them, jump on them or whatever. And so she would rather go more naturally and just use existing stuff. There's a lot of debris up there. So that's her feeling on it too. Yeah. We're not trying to be quantitative in any of this. It's really qualitative, what's there. Because we know that it's a small area, the numbers really don't mean all that much. Yeah. Paul?
Richard, the high ground to the west of West Avenue
Yeah.
is just riddled with springs. There's a Bowser Brook that you talked about that comes directly through the park and all over through town.
Yeah.
There's another stream on the other side that goes down through the Foundry area. And
Yeah.
all of those they don't have their source in mountain snowfall. They have their sources
In
in
springs.
springs all across that
Yeah.
hillside. The same is true in Middle Sackville. There's quite a substantial movement of water down through Middle Sackville where the tanneries used to be,
Mhm.
and it all comes out of that hillside.
Yeah, as Peter said, there's a lot of water that collects there, and the pictures you saw of people skating that Paul had, that's because in the winter they stopped quarrying and they let the water rise, and then they would start the pumps in the spring, pump it all out, and then the whole area would have been kept relatively dry while they're excavating quarry, because they're below water surface level at that point. Yes?
Have you seen evidence of any contaminants in the water?
No, we haven't, and there were water quality and water quantity studies done as part of the environmental
Yeah.
assessment. And they didn't find anything that was particularly scary.
Or just being surrounded by residential
Yeah.
areas, I just wondered.
Things that surprised today for the first time, Kate and I were in there, and we noticed where Bowser Brook comes into the Pickett Pond, it comes over the waterfall, and then there's a sort of a damp, mushy area, and the river goes across that into the quite deep water. It's 9 feet deep right off that. But there are 2 fans of alluvial deposits there. So there's sediment coming down from Peter's been digging in his back garden or something.
Not me.
Something has been coming down those rivers in the last few months and creating these 2 red mud sediment fans. So, but to answer your question, I think it's pretty good.
Richard, the water that's coming through that eventually becomes that stream
Yeah.
collects from the wetlands on the other side of Charlotte, so on the north side of Charlotte.
Yeah.
And also through residential places that drain off.
Mhm.
So it's easy to see how you could get nutrients and things from those areas.
Yeah, there could be that sediment could just come from a house that's being built or something right now. But, yeah, shouldn't really happen. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Is there any sign that says the water is deep or danger or anything like that?
We're gonna put something up. I think we've got things like be careful, hike at your own.
Yes.
The water itself is actually quite far from the people. You can't get to it. And if you stay on the trails, you don't get to the water.
You did mention people skating and, in
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but the people who skate there have always done it. We take an axe, which, we don't go, we haven't got less than 4 inches of ice. But we come to the point where you think, how much can you control these people? But I think what we're gonna do next year is have some more caution signs. This year we had complaints about ice on some of the trails. And to my mind, you expect ice on trails in the winter, but people were not ready for it. So I think what we'll do is have a sign saying, depending on weather and whatever conditions, it already says wear step footwear and be careful, but we'll put more warning up. So that's
I
a good
was
point.
just thinking about the depth of the water, that's all,
Yeah,
as a danger.
it's a little more dangerous than the waterfall park where you can stand up in the whole thing. But you can't in all of this one. Yeah, but very rarely do you see people on the close to the water's edge. There's only a couple of places you can get down. But it's a good point. Thanks.
I've been around there since '92, and there's never been a medical emergency in it.
Of the expressway.
Did I see another hand here? Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
you know the history of the bells in the Pickards, like, because there's, bells came from Chester, and there's the Ralph Pickard Bell and Woodford Bell.
Yeah.
And Pickard Pond here, did a bell come up and marry a Pickard and then come back and?
I think I've got the answer, but it's in Paul's hand.
How long do you have?
Okay, I'm not gonna answer that question because it's
Talk to
but talk to Paul. The answer is yes, they are definitely connected. Yeah, here.
Sandy Burnett was one of the first people that it was instigating to
Yeah.
do the park early on, in the nineties, so.
But already mentioned.
And Sandy was, saw it come to fruition when he was the MC at the opening of the park back this fall. So it's great to see that come around, because he probably been involved in almost all of those attempts to have it done in the past.
Isn't that,
Yeah,
and still interested, so.
still interesting. And we had Sandy go through there about a few weeks after your hip replacement, didn't we? Those first trips, yeah.
So, Richard, you've mentioned some of your favorite critters out there. And that whole natural history story is fabulous. I have one favorite historical theme that I perpetrate on folks, and I'll keep this one quite short. Whenever you're there, the quarrying that was done there starts where the waterfall comes in. So when you come in from the Charlotte entrance and you're on the bridge above the waterfall, there's a hole there, and still today, because that's where they started quarrying. Then over decades, they expanded up into the full of the Pickard Pond. In fact, further than you see it today. Because when Mount A got going, they dug the big northern pond, right? So it starts at the south, works its way up. And then Mount A comes in and makes that big pond at the top, actually pushes the edge back into the Pickard Pond some. But the general rule of thumb is it goes from south to north. 1880s at the south end, 1970s at the north end.
Thanks, Paul. And some of that is summarized on a panel that Paul put together with diagrams, photographs right by the ridge. We're not done yet. We're gonna go back and we've got ongoing maintenance. We're gonna put some more trails in. We're gonna put some more interpretive signs in. Paul's gonna work on some. So we're into the maintenance phase, but it's still a few cool things to talk about. Thank you.
One more question and then, Andrew, go ahead, Andrew.
When you talked about sediment coming in, do you think there's any chance that cattails could establish themselves in the shallow areas around, or is it just not suitable?
There's a
habitat?
couple of small areas where it could establish, but I don't know why. Alders have done it, but not cattails. I don't know enough about what encourages it. I don't know, Paul, sorry, Sean might know better than I would.
Yeah.
We didn't have any, I looked for trifle on your list, it just wasn't there.
Yeah, that's interesting, it wasn't there, yeah, there may be one or two clumps, out along the stream towards Charlotte, that, that's where I would look for it, it's
Yeah.
gonna establish first.
So the answer is maybe, Andrew.
Would it be because it's hard for the cattails to be blown that far to get into the quarry?
Yeah, I don't know where the nearest sources would be, but I thought
The seeds
cattails
are
are pretty good at blowing around.
Yeah, the seeds are probably pretty good at getting almost everywhere that they can grow, so I would guess that there's something about the conditions that are not working for it.
So I have a feeling that a lot of people in this room have been involved with the quarry. I am from Amherst, I kept hearing about the quarry, and the Naturalist Club has done a few trips before all this work had happened, and people were saying how it's quite dangerous and there's some steep trails or whatever. So last year I took the opportunity to go around and hike around it, and it is an incredible spot, as you can see from Richard's presentation. What impresses me so much is that there are individuals right back many years recognizing the value of this spot, a little gem right in the middle of your town but not only recognizing it, but taking the initiative and making it happen by keeping it natural and yet still open to the public. So it is a really amazing spot. So Richard, thank you for your presentation.
You're very welcome.
I learned a lot from it.